Hello and welcome to Design Dispatches, where every week we meet distinguished members of the design community and talk to them about their cultural landscape and how they got to where they got to. And this week I'm delighted to welcome Studio Formafantasma, Andrea Trimarchi and Simone Farresin, a design duo based in Amsterdam, but they're both from Italy. They met in Florence as undergraduates. Then they studied together at the Eindhoven Design Academy as a singular duo. And in 2010, founded their studio and began their design work based in particular on in-depth investigations into materials, beginning with bioplastics and a landmark project in 2011 called Botanica, subsequently acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, but to charcoal, electronic waste, light, volcanic ash. There were tiles in the recent Beazley Designs of the Year exhibition at the Design Museum last year, and wood, and a great exhibition called Cambio at the Serpentine in London, which is currently being staged, but of course at the moment no one's able to see it, although I had the pleasure of seeing it earlier. So welcome both, Andrea, Simone. I want to start with your cultural landscape. I'm actually quite curious about the landscape of where you are. Where exactly are you? It doesn't look like Amsterdam.
We are actually in Tuscany. We were in Amsterdam, and then because we wanted to be closer to our family, then we came back to Italy, and we are doing a quarantine, and we thought that it was better to do that in Tuscany than in any other place.
How is place and where you're working, how is it in relationship to your work, and how is the current climate affecting your work?
Well, usually when we are in the studio, we have a studio home together, and since a couple of years we were quite happy about that, and we are still happy. I have to say that while we were in quarantine, we finally understood that working and living in some environment, it's brilliant, but it is also sometimes problematic because, of course, you share everything with everybody all the time, with all the people that come in the studio every day, and you don't really divide, private life with, working life. So I think this quarantine kind of make us realize that we need a house and we need a proper studio. So I think this is what is gonna happen when we will come back to a normal life, probably.
I have to say that, for instance, for us, the decision to be in Amsterdam and in Holland for so long is also due to the fact that we always thought that, being in Amsterdam is very helpful for our creativity because we are quite isolated there. Sadly, we don't speak Dutch, but we almost feel that is an added value because we really don't have any noise around ourselves, and that helps concentration.
Quite interesting the fact that you're enjoying being together, but away from the studio, where you seem to have more creative time away from the studio.
Well, I'm not sure if it is more creative now. I would say that, okay, we are quite structured as a studio. So we have daytime working, evening time, life and private life. We have been always quite, structured on that. I think, as I said before, this time made us much more realize that we also need to have a bit more space to just even discuss between each other and to fight more. In any case, when we have people around you all the time, and we have a very nice studio in a kind of open air environment, you can't really be free to do what you want. So in a way, we feel that we should have this much more private time together.
Are you looking at different materials as a consequence of being put into isolation? Is your material exploration affected by the crisis?
I think my answer is going to also be linked to your previous question. I think when you are learning something, you always need digestion and moments of processing information. And as much as I was saying before, isolation, it is important. Time is also important. So honestly, I cannot reply on that because I think that we will process over time the experience we are going through, which is traumatic on multiple levels. And I think indeed, in that respect, I don't feel we are yet ready to sort of process it. Nevertheless, I have to say that we looked back at our work in the light of what is happening. And in a way, we almost feel that we should become even more radical with the more research-based work we do. Because of course, in a moment such as this one, sort of more thoughtful and research-based projects, we have the feeling they are more relevant than others, and even more so in this moment. So we hope that this experience will help us in this direction to somehow radicalize our approach.
That's really interesting. I'm always curious about when people knew what it was they wanted to do. So I asked you both the question, when did you know you wanted to be designers? But I'm also curious about when you wanted to know that research would be the essence of your design rather than necessarily product production.
Well, I think it came in two different moments for me and for Simone, because I come from the south of Italy, from Sicily, where, you know, if you have been visiting there for holiday, there's nothing related to design there. It's much more rural. There is like craftsmanship happening. There's no industry in any way possible unless, you know, the extraction of petrol. But for the rest, you know, it's much more concentrated to small scale production. So for me, it was never a matter about, you know, the difference between design and the object in general. So when I decided to study in Florence, I was much more interested in architecture, in art, than in design. Then I understood that the scale of architecture was too big for me, that I much more enjoyed doing, like, you know, the design, or like much more working on a product level. And then I decided to move to design, actually where I met also Simone in Florence, in the same school.
In my case, instead, I got in contact with the idea of design very early on, when I was more or less 16, when I was attending a design action art academy. And I got in love with the work of Benzomari, and then I decided to follow, you know, the design discipline. And regarding the research side, I guess the experience in Eindhoven was very important, and our graduation work was very much formative. So I would say that probably in that moment, that kind of interest started to grow. And then the more we started to developing our practice, the more we realized that design connected on different scales, and research is fundamental to understand the implications of design at large. And that's the only way that we feel is forward in the discipline in a way.
I mean, I said that material exploration was central to your practice, but it seems to me that a kind of conversation or a dialogue with material and between yourselves. I mean, I've heard you say in the past that conversation and words are your tools as much as anything else. Are you systematic in the way that you converse and research, or do you, I mean, how do you break up who does what?
Well, we became more systematic, I have to say.
Conversations are still messy, and of course they're still very much intuitive. And when you are in two, then inevitably words are the important tools, because it is all about the conversation, the communication. And I have to say, between us, we can also be very abstract and we understand each other. We do argue a lot, but usually it's in the process. It's never about the objectives. Those are always common, but how to reach those results can become more and more complex. And I have to say, we are still sort of you know, investigating how to approach the work we do and our investigative practice. And I have to say that probably we over time started to establish more a pragmatic process, which is going through published materials, then reaching out to practitioners that can range from different disciplines that can help us you know, understanding more realistically the subject we're looking into, and then processing these informations through sort of visualization and communication tools. So whether the research can also be shared with others, and then intuitively start a process of translation and possibly of transformation of this knowledge in design proposals.
Also, presentation is really interesting to me, because particularly, I mean, you've done exhibition design. There was a recent exhibition, I think a year ago or so, in Amsterdam around the Baroque in Rome, you know, from Rubens to Caravaggio. The Cambio exhibition at the Serpentine is your exploration, your research, your work, but it's also a designed exhibition, or presented as designed by you. Do you bring a similar design sensibility when you're presenting other people's work to your own? Do you think it's one and the same language, or is there a difference?
Well,
it depends on the work, I guess. Also in the conversation with a third party. You know what I mean? Like, there's always a curator when you work. Sorry if I interrupted you, but I thought of, for instance, the example you made of Caravaggio and Bernini shows in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. The conversation with the curator there was so, an institution was so smooth that we really feel that kind of presentation that totally embodies also our own work in terms of approach.
And it's funny, actually, because I wouldn't describe your work as Baroque. In fact, there's a sort of wonderfully reductive or distilled quality to your work. So it must have been quite interesting working with something as florid or as broad, if you like, and decorative as the Baroque?
You know, like there's multiple elements in the Baroque, and I think we all know the sort of the excessive, the redundant at times. But actually, you know, when you have authors such as Bernini and Caravaggio, their work is exceptional on multiple levels. That has nothing to do with actually decoration, but possibly the display of human emotions in the, you know, in the deepest way, translated in extraordinary ways. So you also have to think, you know, we are Italians, so when they asked us to, you know, to do a work like this, it was extremely you know, important for us, because, you know, when can it happen in, you know, in the course of your life that you decide how to hang a Caravaggio or how to display a piece of Bernini? So we were totally thrilled by the ideas of working with these pieces.
And I have to say, it was also quite a good exercise because, you know, especially when you work with pieces like coming from a specific era, like the one of the Baroque, in the last 100 years, they have been all the time exhibited in the same way, with dark background, very dark rooms, very dramatic lighting. And for us, you know, that was the obvious things to do not do, you know, because already all those characteristics are already embedded within those paintings. So for us, it was quite interesting when we met actually the owners of some of the artworks. They show us how they keep those artworks at home. They usually, most of the time, they're in very normal houses, even if they are, of course, very rich houses, but, you know, on white walls, and sometimes with cradle in front of it, and you know, in normal environment. And for me, that was quite, and I understood probably for the first time that sometimes, you know, when we think about certain artworks, we all the time have this perception given by how they've been represented in time. But this doesn't mean that you can't change the way those things are represented nowadays. So I think it was a good exercise for us to rethink about how, you know, historical painting or artworks can be represented nowadays.
Absolutely. You talk about human emotion in Baroque art. Are you interested in the emotional quality that materials provoke?
Yes, we're not necessarily interested in emotional design. Even I want to puke when I hear about that word. But
yes, I avoided that.
But I do think that definitely there are qualities into materials that are extremely powerful, and I think it is important that we as designers we recognize that, because I have the feeling that often designers are, you know, we all have been trained in considering the physicality and the physical aspects of materials. Nevertheless, there are qualities that are much more sensitive, that impact our you know, well-being as equally as, you know, the performance of objects.
What about your cultural landscape now? What are you reading and listening to and watching, and how does that have impact on your work, or is that an escape?
I mean, definitely. I'm personally reading a book of Bruno Latour. I think the English title is Back to Earth. And also I'm reading a book of Donna Haraway about the relationship she has with her dog, because we're going to have a puppy on Friday.
Tomorrow. Yeah, the day after tomorrow.
So you know, I'm preparing for it.
Well, instead for me, I'm more researching exhibition design. So I'm a bit coming back in studying, and I'm reading some beautiful book from the 70s about exhibition design in Italy, and from the 70s back. So I'm reading that at the moment.
When you talk about exhibition design, are you thinking are you being approached mainly to do art exhibitions, or would you look at architectural or design objects exhibitions by other people?
Art, design.
Art and design.
Art and design, yeah.
But we are open. I think what is interesting about exhibition design, it's multiple aspects. Of course, it's the impact that exhibition design can have in the way the viewer perceives the work, and that's incredibly interesting. But when possible, because it's not always possible, depending also on the commissioner, there is also a challenge, which is the thinking about the ecology of creating an exhibition, because it's a temporary installation. So there's a lot of challenges there that they can also be somehow interesting for designers to think about, how to make it more sustainable, how to make it more meaningful for the moment in which we live nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I know that your Baroque exhibition was sustainable, that the material was to be recycled. Absolutely. I am curious, though, just this idea, having made quite a few exhibitions in my life of art and now of design, uh, the, the, there's a balance always to be struck between curatorial narrative, and designers are often called in at the end, basically to provide a kind of showcase that reinforces the narrative. Are you starting to be involved in developing the narrative from the beginning?
Exactly, yes. For instance, for an exhibition, the one more about contemporary art, we are really, actually we have been asked almost to do to be almost a director, because there are 3 different exhibitions related to science and art and science, and they need to kind of make a very coherent message at the end, or coherent story.
I think also for Caravaggio and Bernini, Baroque in Rome, it was the same story. The curator had in mind the divisions and the selections of the works, but he involved us, for instance, in the decision how to pair them together, how to create narratives between the works. And I think that is fundamental, because otherwise, again, design should never be narrowed down as a styling tool. Yeah. You know what I mean? And this is a problem that goes through from exhibition design to design in general, that often design is called in the last moment, while you need to be involved since the beginning if you want to develop something consistent.
Yeah, also for what relates to sustainability or ecology. I mean, I know what you're referring to is an interview that we did for the zine about the exhibition at the Rijksmuseum. I have to say, it's not really sustainable in the sense, of course, we thought about, certain kind of rule to follow in order to make the exhibition
more sustainable.
For instance, in some of the exhibition we will do from now on, we will really start from the beginning thinking about that.
For instance, if you develop one exhibition for an institution, you can try to be sustainable, but the best way to be sustainable would be to know, for instance, the life cycle of exhibition in the course of a year. Because then you would know, for instance, if you can make choices that can be suitable for multiple exhibitions. So to have this holistic perspective is important, but it's the commissioner that needs to allow you to have this vision.
And being also very connected since the beginning with the producer, because that helps a lot also in understanding, all the problematics of the afterlife of the exhibition. And in the case of the Rijks, the producer came too late in a way. So
the dialogue with them was difficult too. Yeah. Not because he didn't want to, but simply it was too late.
Well, I've got a whole raft of things I'd like to propose to you, but obviously I'm not going to do it in public on a call like this. I think it would be wonderful to get to involve you in some design projects for the showcasing of other design objects. We always ask. Sorry, yeah, thank you that you've agreed. We always ask our guests whether they have an object or objects close to them that means something to them, whose design they like, or there's an emotional connection. Have you got an object for us?
I have 2. We have this one, which is a face shield, and an object we designed ourselves a few years ago. And they have 2 different stories. Well, this is the face because we use it to travel back to Italy. So this is a very useful tool. And it is smartly designed, easy to clean, and I find it much better than face masks. So I'm a fan of this.
Well, who designed that? Do you know who designed that?
I don't know. We should check it. That's a very good question. I don't know who designed it.
Do you mind put it on for us, just so I can see what it looks like?
Yes.
Actually,
so it's
good.
Well, no, it's really interesting. So you can see to clean, but at the same time, it's open. It doesn't shield it protects your face.
Exactly, and it feels.
It doesn't shield from vision.
But also, I noticed that because of course people can see your face, they have a perception of yourself much more sympathetic. So it helps much more sort of. Gentle interaction.
Also, I think there is less waste in using a face shield than a mask that you use in one time. So in a way, I mean, and this is like the cheapest that we bought. I mean, they are very good one and super beautiful one that they are also coming with a cup. I think there is like a lot of designers also now working on this, and I think it's a good solution than the face mask.
We just
Very.
get the sort of on a protection level, if it is at the same level as a good face mask. And then
yes, I
yes,
was going to say, and then the object you designed. Thank you.
well, we took this object because it's a small carafe that we designed a few years ago. But the reason why we thought of talking about this piece is because actually it was a commission from the gallery we work with, Giustini Staggetti in Rome, and they were asking us to sort of use Rome as an inspiration. And we found a similar object in an archaeological museum, and there was no clear description of the function. It was actually different. But I thought what was interesting is that basically this piece is, it has a few thousand years old in terms of its archetype. And I thought that somehow it was interesting to talk about this piece because with design, we all the time think about the invention of the new. But sometimes there are archetypes that exist that are absolutely still marvelous. And in this case, it has a very, very weird shape in a way. But what is interesting is that it makes it very stable on the table and very easy to handle.
And pour very well.
And it pours very, very well. And there is another things that I wanted to say because we have this piece in black and also in red color. And that's because in the history of Roman pottery, there has been 500 years of fashion for black pottery and 500 years of fashion for red pottery. And I thought it was amazing. It was 500 years of fashion.
Yeah.
Fabulous. And the Romans presumably would have had wine or water in it. What do you use it for? Wine or water?
You use it for water, but actually the traditional one, it's a very small object that probably it was used not for liquid, but for like an oil lantern with a, so we readapted the function because we couldn't really get it.
Beautiful and historical. Wonderful. Briefly, just to end, do you have advice for young designers in the current situation? What would your advice be to them?
Well, we live in a very different situation than when we started our own design studio. Nevertheless, we opened our studio at the end of 2009, beginning 2010, which was really in the middle of the economic crisis, which is a very different crisis than the one we are living in nowadays. But what we learned from that experience is that the best thing to do if you want to establish your own studio at the beginning is actually to do not compromise, because at the beginning of your career, basically you're already broke. You live with, what you have. And I think it is better to sort of try to follow what you really believe in, at least at the beginning, and to compromise later when, if you start to grow as a studio and you are responsible also, for instance, for other people that works for you, it's better to compromise in that moment than at the beginning when you should really aim to establish who you are and to follow what you believe in. So that's the advice that I would give in this moment.
You put it very beautifully. So
great. On which harmonious end we should finish. Andrea, Simone, Studio Formafantasma. And thanks for bracing with us in the technology and the wind.
Thank you very much for the conversation.
Stay healthy.
You too.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Keep that mask on. Bye. Bye.